And now we have the illustrations for Chapter 18 of Among the Multihulls, 12 minutes. In the last chapter we had a look at some of the ancient type proas from the Central Pacific Islands. And now we're going to have a look at how these have morphed into modern-day proas. This is Kari, the boat in which I made the voyage that's described in this chapter, but unfortunately I have no pictures made during the voyage itself. So we'll just have to talk about the boat and a few others like her. Actually, I'm no expert when it comes to proas. My experience has been altogether through the work of my son Russell. This is his Jezero, his first experiment in proas, and he learned the hard way that the cross beams were not strong enough. At least not strong enough for serious seafaring, which he undertook with this boat. But I like the pictures because it demonstrates how light and spindly a proa can be. Here she is later with stronger cross beams, and note that the wind is blowing toward us, whereas the float, the outrigger hull, is always kept toward the wind on the upwind side of the vessel. And on the downwind side of the vessel, our side, we can see that protuberance sticking out from the side of the hull. That's the pod, and that's a major difference between the early proas and the modern proas, is that pod. The pod is evident here on the right. It's a big, buoyant, streamlined chamber. But on the far left, note also that there is a dagger board in the weather float. Here's the pod seen at rest, and note that it has enough buoyancy so that if the boat is hurled over to the right with the mast approaching horizontal, there is enough buoyancy in the pod to cause the main hull to act as a counterweight, which could tend to rewrite the vessel. And this shows two proas tied up together with their pods adjoining. A very unusual, confusing photograph. And proas can be confusing to us anyway. But this is actually what's happening in the previous photograph. Note the two pods almost touching. And this is a Dick Newick design, Cheers, the boat that really started the modern interest in proas. She's shown here in a painting by the great Bruce Alderson, who is the same artist who painted the cover for this book. This is another of Dick Newick's so-called Atlantic-style proas, and note the major difference. The outrigger float is always kept on the downwind side of the main hull. And as the sails indicate here, the wind is blowing toward us. And that requires very strong cross beams. It's just the opposite as in the Pacific type proas. Well, we're back to the Pacific type here. The outrigger float is on our side and the wind is coming from our side. And that big dagger board in the outrigger hull is in the up position. It's not being used at present. Also apparent on the main hull's now bow, it looks like there's also a dagger board in the up position. That is actually a combination dagger board and rudder. It's also unused at present. And there's another one like it on the now stern, but it's in the down position being used to steer the boat. That's right, two rudders, one for going in either direction. Now here's due respect to the Polynesians who steered with a steering oar that was stuck in a forked stick. These modern proas do it a different way. The rudder in use on the now stern is connected by that long push rod to a thing called a whipstaff in the cockpit. And the push rod going forward to the unused rudder on the now bow can be used as a handrail when going out to change head sails. So there are two of these whipstaffs in the cockpit. one for steering in each direction, and there's a seat in each end of the cockpit for facing in each direction while steering. And the steering is done like this: pull, push. It's a push me pull you. And this was my position for that story in the text when we were surfing waves that looked to me at the time to be about the size of those islands. The boat will only motor in one direction. And for changing directions, whether you're under power or sail, it's easy to get the board rudders up and down with lines leading to the cockpit. And because there's no wind, we're motoring through these heavy tidal current swirls in the passes between the northern Gulf Islands up in the Straits of Georgia, British Columbia.
Hey. Like that, Mom? Whoa.
Well, the title of this chapter, number 18, is Park It, Dad. And this is parking. It's a very unique thing about these boats. They will always innately lie with their outrigger hull toward the wind, which is coming from our left. And the mainsail can be left to tail off dead downwind, and the boat will lie like that and go almost nowhere. And that's even in rough seas, when the outrigger hull can be loaded with water ballast that's pumped in from the cockpit. So now the crew can reef down or change sails, and even if you fall overboard, you've got a darn good chance of climbing back aboard. Heck, we even parked just to go fishing. Oh. Well, here's how it looks in the belly of the beast, and note that the left side, which is the upwind side of the hull, is a little fatter than the downwind side on the right. And it's enough to make you think that if the Micronesians had had epoxy, and if their boats could have carried cannon, we might not be speaking English today. Yes, this is the boat where even the galley sink is made of laminated wood epoxy. There's a little table on the left for eating and navigation, plenty of storage in the ends. And on the right, tucked away in the pod, is a generous double bunk with eye level at window level, and the same feature while standing under the coach roof. For a 37-footer, the interior is tight, no doubt. It's a real backpacker's boat. But there's also no doubt that the people of the ancient Pacific would have loved it. Okay, so the question is why? And why does it have to go in both directions? Well, the answer to that question is so that it only has to receive the wind from one side. And that right there opens a tremendous window of efficiency for a sailing machine. The boat does not have to be designed to resist the force of the wind from both sides. Oh, so that's why it has to go in both directions. And that even must be why it has to have two rudders and all that other weirdness. But it's not all about speed. If you're really into sailing, there's nothing like speed. And as far as I know, this is the only shot of one of Russell's boats at flank speed, something well over 20 knots. But of the three multi-hull configurations given to us by the ancient people, catamaran, trimaran, and proa, there's no doubt that the proa wins the knots per dollar prize. Probably the highest speed for the least investment of any seafaring configuration. And this boat is not a flash in the pan. She's really been around. Here she is in the bay called San Francisquito in the Sea of Cortez. And she has also been out across the Pacific and down to New Zealand. Now, this project is supposed to be about multi-hull history, but I can't help taking a bold look at the future. For example, just look at what has become of the trimaran in only 50 years. This is the first modern seafaring trimaran, 1959, and it has morphed into this behemoth ferry boat. And yes, this thing is a trimaran, over 400 feet long. It has the smoothest ride for the highest speed and the very greatest fuel economy of any known configuration for seafaring. I like to imagine this thing at a time when humankind is forced to utilize the power of the wind for overseas transportation. Given what has happened in the world in the last 50 years, it's not too hard to visualize a 400-foot proa 50 years from now. It would probably have engines just for schedule keeping in calms. But in a post-petroleum world, it may very well require sails. Who knows, they might be like the rigid wing sails now in use on the America's Cup racers, and the vessel might also be built of laminated wood. I can picture this construction at 400 feet. It was often done before we even had epoxy. So anyway, that's why I believe that, say, 50 years from now, it will be some version of the Micronesian canoe that serves humankind with the highest speed for the least motion and the greatest commercial efficiency of any seafaring configuration known.